In 1965, television viewers were invited to believe that the Robinson family was stepping into the future. They were scientists, explorers, and astronauts, leaving Earth aboard the Jupiter 2 on a mission that promised humanity a new beginning. The faces became familiar almost overnight. Guy Williams as the confident John Robinson, June Lockhart as Maureen, Mark Goddard as Don West, Marta Kristen and Angela Cartwright as the Robinson daughters, and a young Bill Mumy as Will. Then there was Jonathan Harris, whose Dr. Zachary Smith was supposed to be a threat. And beside them stood the robot, warning everyone whenever danger was near. On the surface, Lost in Space looked like a straightforward adventure about a family stranded among the stars. But the cast later revealed something far more interesting. The show people remember today was not quite the show they thought they were watching. The series premiered on September 15, 1965, and ultimately ran for 3 seasons and 83 episodes. Its first season was filmed in black and white before the production moved into color. Yet the biggest transformation was not visual. It was tonal. According to Bill Mumy, the series gradually shifted its focus away from the Robinson family and toward the unusual relationship between Will Robinson and Dr. Smith. Jonathan Harris remembered that evolution too, describing how Smith became increasingly comedic and how the series developed a much more campy personality. That change is one of the most important clues to understanding why Lost in Space became so different from its original premise. What many fans miss is that this transformation happened in plain sight. The show began with the ingredients of serious science fiction: a family mission, survival, futuristic technology, and the uncertainty of being cut off from Earth. But audiences also discovered a different kind of chemistry. Mumy's Will and Harris's Smith created a relationship that could generate conflict, comedy, and endless new situations. The robot became part of that triangle, not merely a machine but a character whose voice and personality helped define the show's identity. Harris later summed up the unusual arrangement with a memorable observation about having a robot as his comic partner. Suddenly, the villain was no longer simply trying to destroy the Robinsons. He was becoming part of the family dynamic. And there was another detail hiding behind the familiar images. The actors were not simply performing inside a finished fantasy world. They were helping shape how that world worked from week to week. Mumy remembered the demanding production schedule, the special effects, the costumes, the robot, and the practical realities of being a young actor on the set. Sandra Gimple later recalled becoming Mumy's stunt double and stand-in, while Harris helped persuade the young actor to accept the arrangement even though Mumy wanted to perform his own stunts. These details make the old episodes look different when you watch them again. The strange costumes, elaborate props, and sometimes exaggerated performances were pieces of a production evolving in real time. So the mystery is not simply why Lost in Space became campy. The deeper question is why the cast embraced a series that was changing underneath them, and how that change created the version millions of viewers still remember. Because behind the famous warning, the colorful planets, and Dr. Smith's schemes was a production full of unexpected decisions, shifting relationships, and personalities that became larger than the original story. And one of those personalities would quietly become the key to everything that followed. Will Robinson, the boy audiences followed into danger everywhere. At first glance, Will Robinson seemed like the obvious child character in a large family ensemble. He was intelligent, curious, and young enough to be vulnerable. But he was not supposed to carry the entire series. The Robinson family was the foundation of the premise. John and Maureen were the parents, Judy and Penny were the daughters, Don West was the pilot, and everyone had a reason to survive. Yet Bill Mumy's performance gave Will something the writers could continually build around. His age allowed the story to explore danger differently. He could be frightened, fascinated, reckless, brilliant, or completely outmatched, sometimes within the same episode. Mumy had already accumulated substantial television experience before joining the series, including appearances on The Twilight Zone. He was still a child when he became Will Robinson, but his professional experience helped him handle a production that could be unusually demanding. In his Television Academy interview, Mumy described the working environment, the production schedule, the special effects, the wardrobe, and the practical challenges of making science fiction television on a tight schedule. His memories show that the futuristic world viewers saw was built through a combination of imagination, physical sets, costumes, props, and an enormous amount of work behind the camera. Then came Dr. Smith. Jonathan Harris had originally been hired to play a more conventional villain, but he made a crucial creative decision. Instead of treating Smith as a straightforward menace, Harris pushed the character toward comedy. He developed a flamboyant personality and found ways to turn danger into theatrical mischief. Harris later recalled how he transformed Smith into a more comedic villain and how Irwin Allen reacted to that choice. The result changed the balance of the entire program. Smith could still cause problems, but he could also carry scenes through humor, vanity, fear, and ridiculous schemes. That evolution created an unlikely partnership. Will and Smith were opposites. Will represented curiosity and youthful innocence. Smith represented selfishness, deception, and survival instinct. Yet the two characters repeatedly found themselves together. Mummy later described how the focus shifted toward Will and Smith, confirming what viewers could increasingly see on screen. The show had found an emotional and comedic engine that could keep generating stories without abandoning the science fiction setting. The robot made that relationship even more unusual. Bob May physically performed inside the robot costume, while Dick Tufeld provided the voice. May later discussed the difficulties of operating the costume, seeing through it, managing its lights, and working with Harris. The robot was therefore not a single performer in the ordinary sense. It was a character created through physical performance, voice performance, design, and editing. That distinction is easy to overlook when watching the finished episodes decades later. But the greatest surprise was what this did to the original family structure. The parents remained important, and the other actors continued contributing to the ensemble, but the emotional center increasingly revolved around the youngest Robinson and the man who was supposed to threaten him. Harris himself later spoke about the series becoming more campy over time. That was not merely a change in costume or dialogue. It was a change in what the audience expected from the show. The question was no longer simply whether the Robinsons would survive. Viewers wanted to see what trouble Smith, Will, and the robot would create next. And once that chemistry became impossible to ignore, the series entered a new phase, one that would surprise even people who remembered the original premise. The strangest transformation in Lost in Space was not the technology, the planets, or the monsters. It was Dr. Zachary Smith. A character introduced as a threat gradually became one of the show's most recognizable personalities. That evolution was driven partly by Jonathan Harris himself, whose performance refused to remain inside the boundaries of a traditional television villain. Harris understood that Smith could be more entertaining if audiences sometimes laughed at him, sometimes feared him, and sometimes almost felt sorry for him. Harris later explained that he deliberately turned Smith into a more comedic figure. The important detail is that this was not simply an accidental change caused by bad writing or changing fashion. Harris was actively shaping the character, and Irwin Allen's response helped determine how far that transformation could go. As the episodes continued, Smith's exaggerated manner became increasingly compatible with the series' changing tone. The result was a fascinating contradiction. Smith could be selfish and dangerous, yet he was rarely allowed to become completely monstrous. His schemes often created problems for everyone, but his presence also generated the humor that increasingly defined the show. The more the series leaned into that humor, the less useful a purely serious villain became. Smith had effectively escaped his original role. This also changed Will Robinson. Instead of simply being the child who needed protection from dangerous worlds, Will became someone who could challenge Smith, argue with him, help him, and occasionally depend on him. Their relationship gave the series an unusual emotional texture. They were not friends in the conventional sense, but neither were they simple enemies. They were two characters trapped in the same strange environment, constantly affecting each other's choices. Bill Mummy's recollections make clear how important this relationship became. He discussed the shifting focal point of the show and specifically described the movement toward Will and Dr. Smith. Jonathan Harris also remembered working with Mummy and spoke about the younger actor with obvious affection. Their chemistry was therefore not merely a theory created by modern fans looking backward. It was something the performers themselves recognized when reflecting on the series years later. Behind that chemistry, however, television production was far less glamorous than the finished episodes suggested. Mummy remembered a demanding weekly schedule. The actors had to work around elaborate sets, costumes, effects, and technical requirements. Sandra Gimple's recollections provide another glimpse into that reality. She worked as Mummy's stunt double and stand-in, performing physical work that a young actor could not always safely do. Harris reportedly helped convince Mummy to accept the arrangement because the child actor wanted to handle his own stunts. Then there was the robot. Bob May's work required him to physically operate inside an elaborate costume, while Dick Tufeld supplied the character's distinctive voice. May remembered practical difficulties that audiences could never see, including how he viewed the set from inside the costume and how demanding the role could become. The robot's apparent simplicity was therefore deceptive. The character was one of the most technically complicated performances on the show. By the later stages of the series, the contrast was unmistakable. The program that began as a serious family survival adventure had developed into something much more playful and theatrical. Yet that transformation was precisely what made it memorable. The cast had not simply followed a fixed blueprint. Their performances changed the blueprint. And that left one final mystery. If the cast had helped turn Lost in Space into something so distinctive, why did the series end after only 3 seasons? The answer is more complicated than simply saying the show had run its course. By the time Lost in Space reached its 3rd season, the series was no longer the same production that had premiered in 1965. The first season had been filmed in black and white, while the 2nd and 3rd seasons were produced in color. The series had accumulated 83 episodes, and its characters had become familiar television personalities. Yet the program's changing tone had also become impossible to separate from its identity. What began as a space survival drama had become a mixture of science fiction, family adventure, comedy, fantasy, and camp. For fans who discovered the series later through reruns, that evolution can be difficult to appreciate. Modern viewers often remember Lost in Space as one continuous experience, but the cast remembered distinct phases. Mummy discussed the shift from a serious space drama toward camp, while Harris openly embraced the comedic direction that had developed around Smith. Their memories reveal that the transformation was not hidden from the people making the show. They were living through it episode by episode. The most fascinating part is that the cast continued working within the same basic world even as the emotional priorities changed. John and Maureen Robinson remained the parents. Judy and Penny remained part of the family. Don West remained a central member of the crew. Will remained the gifted young explorer. Smith remained the source of trouble. The robot remained nearby. But the relationships between those characters had become more important than the original premise alone. That is why the performances matter so much when looking back. Guy Williams brought a strong presence to John Robinson, while June Lockhart gave Maureen an authority that balanced the family. Mark Goddard provided Don West with a different kind of energy. Marta Kristen and Angela Cartwright helped maintain the Robinson family identity. Meanwhile, Mummy, Harris, May, and Tufeld formed an especially unusual combination of child actor, comic villain, physical performer, and voice actor. The cast was effectively operating on several different dramatic levels at once. The robot illustrates this perfectly. On screen, it looked like one character. Behind the scenes, it was divided between Bob May's physical performance and Dick Tufeld's voice. May later discussed how he was initially not credited and how difficult the costume could be. Yet the robot became one of the most recognizable figures associated with the series. The warning cry that became part of television history came from a character whose creation required far more teamwork than casual viewers realized. Jonathan Harris also remembered the production schedule as demanding. Television series of that era were produced quickly, and Lost in Space was no exception. The actors had to deliver performances while dealing with complex production requirements. The finished show could feel colorful and effortless, but the work behind it was anything but effortless. When the series finally ended on March 6, 1968, it had completed 3 seasons and 83 episodes. But cancellation did not erase its identity. Harris later reflected on the show's ending and its lasting legacy, while Mummy continued discussing the possibility of returning to the world of Lost in Space. The fact that the cast continued talking about the characters decades later tells us something important. The journey had ended on television, but it had never really ended for the people who made it. Because the final truth about Lost in Space is not that it became something worse than its original concept. It became something different, and that difference is exactly why it survived. The easiest way to remember Lost in Space is through its symbols. The robot, Dr. Smith. Will Robinson, the Jupiter 2, the family walking across impossible landscapes, the famous warning that danger was approaching. Those images have survived for generations because they immediately transport viewers back to a very specific era of television. But the cast's recollections reveal a deeper reason the series remained memorable. Its identity was never completely fixed. It started as a science fiction adventure created and produced by Irwin Allen, centered on the Robinson family and their struggle after being lost in space. The series premiered in September 1965 and continued for 3 seasons, ending in March 1968 after 83 episodes. The first season was black and white, while the remaining seasons were in color. Those facts are simple. The complicated part is everything that happened between them. Bill Mumy remembered the show changing from a more serious space drama into something increasingly campy. He specifically described the focal point moving toward Will Robinson and Dr. Smith. Jonathan Harris remembered a similar evolution from another angle. He had taken a villain and transformed him into a comedic character, discovering that Smith could be more entertaining when audiences laughed at his arrogance and failures. The two memories fit together almost perfectly. The show changed because its characters changed. And perhaps that is what most fans never fully figured out. Lost in Space was not simply a series that accidentally became camp. It was a series whose performers found a new center of gravity. The chemistry between Mumy and Harris gave the writers opportunities they could keep returning to. The robot expanded that chemistry even further. Bob May's physical performance and Dick Teufeld's voice created a character that could react to both Will and Smith, while becoming a personality in its own right. The behind-the-scenes stories make the result even more remarkable. Mumy was still a child actor working within a demanding production schedule. Sandra Gimple served as his stunt double and stand-in, and her memories show how much practical work went into scenes that appeared effortless on television. May worked inside the robot costume, dealing with limitations that viewers could not see. Harris used his own instincts to reshape Smith. None of these details alone explains the show's endurance. Together, they do. There is also something almost poetic about the title. The Robinsons were literally lost in space, but the series itself became lost between genres. It began in one place and gradually traveled somewhere unexpected. It never completely abandoned its original family adventure foundation, yet it embraced comedy and theatrical absurdity strongly enough to become something uniquely recognizable. That may explain why people who grew up with the show can remember it so vividly even when individual episodes are blurred together. They may forget a planet's name or a particular monster, but they remember the relationships. They remember Will and Smith. They remember the robot. They remember the feeling of watching a family confront one impossible situation after another. Jonathan Harris once expressed gratitude for the series in a way that captured its strange magic. He was grateful for having a robot as his comic partner. That simple idea says almost everything. The show found humor where a serious science fiction drama might have found only danger. So when we look back at Lost in Space, the real revelation is not one secret scene or one forgotten production trick. It is the realization that the cast themselves helped transform the series into the cultural memory we inherited. The show survived because its characters became bigger than the premise, and because the actors discovered something the original concept could not fully predict. Which part of Lost in Space surprised you the most? The transformation of Dr. Smith, the importance of Will Robinson, or the reality behind the robot? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story brought back memories, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more untold stories from classic television.